Yeah. I am live with the Legal Eagle, Eric Segall, here on a Monday afternoon. It's 4 p.m. The president just took our tiny king, I call him Segall, just took a jet from a major funder of Hamas. So everything is normal. It's great to see you. Thank you for doing this as always.
My pleasure, my friend. Hey, we're going to discuss something in the next few minutes we've never discussed on this show before, I think. And that would be golf.
Well, we're going to make a reference to golf. That you mislead people when you say, why can't I talk about sports? We could talk about golf as it relates to politics or sports as it relates to
teasing, I know.
Your recent piece at Dorf on Law, which was great, about two of the best basketball players of all time and what they had to go through as the country had to go through. Everybody should read. If we have time, we'll talk about all of that. So let me move on to the most imminent of details, though, to talk with you about of developments. First of all, just this idea of suspending habeas corpus. We have to not use Latin. Let's talk about now. Please don't use any Latin at all.
You got it. No Latin coming up. We talked last time, Pete, you and I, that the only thing that really separates us from arbitrary detention by the president saying, Dominic, don't like you, go to prison. Segall, don't like you, go to prison, is something called the writ of habeas corpus, which the founding fathers thought so important that they put it in the Constitution, and they said only Congress can repeal it. Because this is what King George did. King George would lock people up for no reason, no due process, nothing. And the founding fathers said that's not going to be our country unless in times of rebellion or invasion. Those are the only exceptions. But Pete, there's no such thing as partially suspending the writ for immigrants or somebody else. Either the writ is in place or it's not. You're pregnant or you're not. That's all it is. There's no middle ground. The president cannot suspend it, despite what Steve Miller, I keep on calling him the Steve Miller Band. I don't know why.
Don't do that.
Despite what he's babbling about, the president can't suspend it. During the Civil War, Lincoln did suspend it, but no one thought that was really effective, including some of the justices, until Congress affirmed that suspension a year and a half later. But make no mistake, Pete, that was during the fucking Civil War. Rebellion and invasion is not what's happening in this country today. No reasonable person thinks it is. And by the way, no judge is going to say that it is. I think Trump would lose this 9-0 in the Supreme Court.
He would lose if they try to go to the Supreme Court. Who would be bringing that case?
What would happen is the president would try to suspend the writ. He'd issue some kind of executive order saying the writ of habeas corpus no longer exists or something. He'd say there's been an invasion. That's what he would say. And then somebody who's arrested would find a lawyer to say, my client has been denied the writ of habeas corpus. The president, then lawyers would say that's because there's an invasion. And I have to say, I think that would lose in the courts, but I don't know if the president's going to care if it loses in the courts. So there's one more thing to it. Pete, Lincoln did it during the Civil War. That was the last time we've suspended the writ of habeas corpus.
The president is doing a lot of things as a result of declaring that we're in a war right now. What is the legality of that? And he's talking specifically, I think, about certain Latin American countries, even more specifically Venezuela and a gang. He's trying to be able to do things that you can only do if there is a war. Lincoln did it during the Civil War where 700,000 Americans died or something, right? So what about what he is claiming as a defense of this, that we're being invaded?
There is no defense of it. We didn't suspend the writ after 9/11. We didn't suspend the writ after Pearl Harbor. It's so, Pete, I was thinking about this before we came on the air. You and I have talked about every corner of constitutional law for 12 years. From guns to abortion to affirmative action to campaign finance reform, even sometimes to double jeopardy and self-incrimination, every single con law issue. You know what we never discussed? We never discussed birthright citizenship. We never discussed the president repealing the writ of habeas corpus.
Right.
These are things that were just so well established can't be done. And I don't, James Madison talked about the Constitution being a parchment barrier. What he meant by that is it's a piece of paper. It's only as good as the people who believe in it. And this administration, as everyone knows by now, does not believe in the United States Constitution. It just doesn't. But Pete, it's actually worse than that. I wanted to mention this. I may have mentioned it last time, but it bears repeating. With my own two little beady eyes, I watched Steve Miller in the White House
Stephen
talking to reporters, saying the president of the United States won 9-0 in the deportation case, that he actually lost 9-0. Pete, and that's the advice President Trump is getting. And no reporter in the room really fought back on it. So it's a failure for everybody because he lost 9-0.
I don't all the criticism of no reporter in the room, blank and blank. You've given me the opportunity to push back on that. There's so many people I respect saying that. And I just want to say, if a reporter pushes back to the president in the Oval Office, much less almost anywhere else, they're no longer in there. Neither is their outlet. It's too easy to sit here and scream and demand that reporters do a better job there. It's a very delicate balance just to stay in the room. So I'm going to give people credit for even staying in the room and asking a question delicately. So I wonder if.
So Pete, let me say I agree. Thank you for that correction. I'm glad you said it. I agree. I agree 100% for like 98% of the press. I will say this. The Supreme Court press, the reporters for the Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, and Wall Street Journal, all 4 of those reporters who are the main reporters for those outlets know very well what happened. And they know that in front of the whole world, Steve Miller completely mischaracterized Steve Miller. They could write about it. They don't rely on Trump. They're not in the press room. It's so off. Pete, you have to understand it. It would be like someone saying Pete Dominic's daughters' names are Betty and Jamie, and you have to listen to that 24 hours a day. No, they're not. Those aren't their names. So
I think it's a little different than that.
Decision was 9-0 against him on any standard. There's no wiggle room, and he's saying it was 9-0 for him.
Just going back real quick on just to thread that needle, when we talk about suspending the writ of habeas corpus and the right to a defense and all that comes with it in America that always have, what they're going to say, I know this is an illegal question, it's more of a political question, but just to be clear, I guess it ends up in a legal conclusion. They're going to say, listen, don't worry about that. This is only happening because we've got millions of people here illegally and they can't all get a trial. That's what this is about. This is about them. This is about the fact that we are deporting people without due process, without a trial. I don't think we talked about this, but I saw Scalia, and apparently it was never controversial, that all persons in the country get legal rights. Not all.
Me last time we talked.
We did talk about it, I think, but maybe briefly. But I just saw this audio or video of Scalia in an interview with RBG, by the way, both asking that question. So this is about undocumented people. They're here illegally. We do not have the resources in the courts to give them all trials.
But Pete, that's the most frustrating thing. No one is claiming these people get what the American public thinks as of trials. No one is saying that. No one is saying you have to impanel a jury. And
that's what they're making it seem like.
No, you get hearings, and we have hearings. We've had immigration hearings in this country now for decades and decades and decades and decades. And no, you get a hearing to present your asylum claim or whatever it is. Nobody. That's the other thing. The reporters are not. I want them to push back and say, "Well, I saw some do this. It's not a trial. We're not talking about trials. We're talking about immigration hearings that have been going on in this country."
By the way, I will say this. I'll say this. I don't know the difference, and most people watching and listening don't know the difference between a trial and a hearing. They both sound the same for me. I know they're very different, but I'll play dumb guy. Go ahead.
If you are here illegally, then you have a set of statutes and regulations that Congress passed and the president has passed that guide the determination of whether you get to stay here. At no point in that process, Pete, is there a criminal trial, meaning a jury and what you think of as a trial, like from Law and Order. What there are a series of evidentiary hearings that can take 5 minutes or an hour or a day, depending on the case. And we've been doing these now for decades and decades and decades. And they're not that expensive. And we know how to do it. And everything you're hearing about this is misstatements and fabrications. No one is saying that everybody gets a jury trial. Now, if you want to put them in prison for murder, then they get a jury trial, just like you do or I do. But to send them back to their home country or to deport them someplace else, no, you don't need a jury trial. There's all kinds of other much less expensive ways of doing this that we have been doing for decades. Pete, the other thing is, as you know, and you're the last person I have to say this to, I'm not saying there's not a crisis at the border. I'm not saying there's not an immigration problem. but it all comes back down to race. It comes back to race, and it comes back to brown people, not white people.
Yeah.
And he's doing it so openly, taking these people from South Africa, these white folks from South Africa, and giving them special status, which he did today, and giving them asylum, which he did today. Announcing that is just, it's not the actual body count. There aren't that many people. He's making the point. Whites are welcome, brown people are not.
Well, you may not have heard the news, but I just put these two dots together and wrote a snappy post. Trump administration welcomed white South Africans on the same day today that they ended temporary protections for more than 10,000 Afghans and Cameroonians. And then I just wrote, no words for how blatant their white supremacy is. So inhumane for them and so humiliating and embarrassing for us. But just to be clear, like, I don't know what the Cameroonians' temporary protection status, I don't know what's going on in their country. But I do know that Afghanistan is the country that we invaded and occupied for 20 years, for better, for worse. Without it, like, the idea that we would not take a certain amount of them and give them an opportunity, especially those who helped Americans, is so unbelievably grotesque to me. On the same day, we welcomed a bunch of white South Africans.
Right. But see, that's the whole point. So the reason one of the reasons we have the immigration system we have, and I am not an expert in this, but I know enough to say this, is because you know what we said to the Jews fleeing Germany, fleeing Poland, we said, too bad, so sad, you can't come. And that's what triggered the bureaucratic immigration system we have today. And Pete, that was not because they were Jews. We've done it other times in our history. To say no to those people fleeing concentration camps is a mistake we said we were not going to repeat. Well, now we're repeating it, of course, because Steve. I mean, I keep going back to Miller, Pete, because I have seen him now in numerous times where I think he's actually running things. I think it is, and it's what he wants. This is all his blueprint. It's all what he wants, and he is a white supremacist. Period. I don't know how this is happening. I don't know how the Republicans in this country are watching white supremacy take over the White House.
Well, you know exactly how it's happening. But let me move on to another important issue.
Can't I be sad that it's happening, though? Like, I'm sad. I'm really sad about it.
Yeah. I'm trying to unpack that. Of course you can, because you've been fighting for specifically Black civil rights and women's rights for your entire life. So yeah, you can be especially sad given where we're at and how long you've been in the fight. More sad than some of the whites.
Thank you for that, my friend. Thank you.
Of course. You're a champion and always have been.
Not only that way. I mean, I never, when you and I first discussed Citizens United, which I said was going to start the log roll of destroying our country, no matter what issue we've talked about in the past, the heaviness wasn't there, sometimes with abortion, but not always. But the weight of this evil in my own country, I'm feeling territorial about my own country, which is not something I ever really felt before.
What do you mean to unpack territorial? I'm feeling embarrassed by and humiliated by things like what I just read. We're bringing in South Africans and sending out people who, I mean, deserve for so many reasons to be in the United States of America, particularly these Afghans.
I think I feel like for the first, Pete, I guess my wife, is a big believer that shame is a more powerful emotion than we give normally.
For lots of people,
I feel shame for our country, and it's terrible. It's a terrible feeling.
Yeah, I felt that way. I've felt that way for a long time. My brother raised me and radicalized me that way. America taught me to be proud and say the Pledge of Allegiance, and fighter jets flew over, and I would cry, and I love all of the things in America. But then my brother, and then Noam Chomsky, and then so many other writers and historians. I mean, and George Carlin, and I don't know. I felt that way for a long time. I guess.
I agree. Anyway, that shame feeling. It's one thing to disagree about policy, which we, I especially. I love those debates and discussions. I love talking to people who disagree with me about things we can disagree about. Steve Miller running the country is not something I find reasonably disagree. I mean, it's just awful.
The most shame, I'm trying to think now, you got me on that. The most intense shame I felt for a sustained period of time was after it was the invasion of Iraq. And that was I think as a result of living through 9/11 in my city, I felt like I deserved to have a stake in the reaction and what we should do. And I felt, and I'm still mad about that all the time, because I covered it and talked to so many experts and interviewed so many veterans and met so many, and still do. I'm still angry and shameful about that. And even more shameful that the president, moving on, is now working with like the countries and best friends with and making so much money off the countries like Saudi Arabia, who are behind 9/11 and who are human rights violators, and the Qataris, of course, who fund Hamas. They just gave him a jet. So can you take a gift? Doesn't the Constitution say, and call it an emolument? But everybody I know that's worked in and around the government, and people have been on my show and on the Colbert Report where I used to work, Bernie Sanders wouldn't even take a ride to the show as a guest, or neither would John Kerry. And you can't take a mug or a sword, barely, from a foreign leader as a gift. Those all go into like the archives when they even get offered. What do we need to know?
So Donald Trump just accepted the gift of what's going to be, I guess, the replacement for Air Force One, which is kind of crazy to begin with, how we would delegate that to a foreign country. Is like the president's going to ride around in an airplane made by a foreign country, make America great again by buying super palaces in the sky from Qatar. Like, that's bizarre to begin with. The national security, who knows what Qatar is building into the plane? That's the second thing. But when I watched him today asked about this, and his answer was sincere. I believe he gave a totally sincere answer. He said today, for everybody to hear, look, Sam Snead, the great golfer, said, if somebody gives you a putt, then you take it. When you play golf for fun, with friends, you want to speed up the game. If the putt's within 3 feet, you got to take the putt. Some people take it, some people don't. Trump said, of course you take the putt. Well, they offered us a free airplane. Of course I'm going to take it. I'd be stupid not to. Pete, he had no sense, no understanding that elected officials are supposed to make decisions for the betterment of the American people, not to personally make themselves richer and have more money and property.
Well, he was saving the American people money he got a free plane.
No, he says this plane is going to his library afterwards, which makes it a gift to him, which makes it a personal gift to him. None of that's the point. The point is we can't be taking these kinds of gifts from foreign countries, because then the person who is accepting the gifts gets a blurry line between what's best for me and what's best for the American people, which is why when the president gets a memorial sword or memorial, cat, whatever, from a foreign country, he logs it in. It goes to the White House, room for this kind of thing. And he may or may not get it back at the end of his term. But Pete, public officials don't take presidents from people they regulate and do business with and whose interests they're supposed to, either represent or not. But the main point I want to make here is, I want to repeat this. Donald Trump was sincere when he said, I see nothing wrong with this. The fact that he sees nothing wrong with it is the problem. That's the very problem, right?
So it would be all the same if it were Obama, Biden, or Bush, and they took a sword or a plane. It would still be bad. It would look so bad. But what's so crazy, as you said it earlier, I think before we were recording or not, he's doing it openly. And what you may or may not know, Eric, because I've just read the reporting, but at the end of April, it was announced in all the news, Reuters, Axios, Newsweek, new Trump golf course, $5.5 billion beachside project, the Qatar development.
Of course.
So they have a long history with Qatar. Pam Bondi apparently was like on.
She represented them. She lobbied for them. She's now the Attorney General. We can stop right there. I mean, no, we can just stop right there.
Why is that?
By the way, I'm sorry, Pete. So here's the thing about the Trump administration this time around also. Pat Biondi, Steve Miller, and his press secretary, they say everything with such hatred and such vitriol.
Yeah, it's very mean.
The president would never do anything to hurt the United States of America. And I am upset that you would imply such a thing. I mean, this is the Attorney General of the United fucking States. Sorry. Oh my God.
No, you're channeling all of us. This is exactly the type of energy that
seriously. I had a case at the Department of Justice. I've mentioned this to you once before. Big case. It was on 60 Minutes, where the FBI was accused with bugging people in Cincinnati, the mayor of Cincinnati, Jerry Springer, all these baseball players, these famous. The point of all this is I had this big case. I got rid of it really well. I did my job, got rid of the case. And one of the local people who now was released from the case wanted to buy me the most expensive dinner in Cincinnati for getting rid of the case. And I think technically, actually, I might have been able to take it because we had no relationship. But I said, no, of course not. You can't buy me. I work for the government. You can't buy me dinner after this case. Like, Everyone knows this. It's not hard. I mean, what? Sorry.
Absolutely. No, it's so good to have your experience and obviously your credibility in understanding on the law. Okay, so we've got and also just in the U.S. Constitution has a thing about this. The U.S.
No, it's not even a legal thing. Forget the legal thing. If you don't, so what people are saying today, which thank goodness they are, because I get to bring Judge Posner back into our classroom.
Frank,
your show. So what people are saying today is someone else today on the New York Times said corruption requires a quid pro quo, that it's not corrupt unless you actually do the act in return for the golf course or in return for the plane or whatever. None of that is true at all. And the Supreme Court, but I will say this, the Supreme Court has taken white collar crime and kind of erased the crime from white collar by requiring all kinds of evidentiary things you have to prove for bribery and corruption. So there was a case where the federal government limited the amount of total money you could give to a politician, total amount of money. And it was challenged. And a guy in Alabama wanted to write a check to a politician in California. Supreme Court said the statute was unconstitutional, to which Judge Posner, while he was a sitting judge, wrote an article in Slate magazine saying the Chief Justice is either stupid or lying, because everybody knows that corruption is not just quid pro quo. The founding fathers knew very well that you don't dangle gifts in front of elected people and hope they would do their job. So what Posner said was, Justice Roberts said, corruption requires a quid pro quo. And that's so stupid, so ahistorical, so wrong, that either Justice Roberts is stupid or lying. And guess what? He's not stupid. I mean, seriously, that's where we are in this country, where white collar criminals get to do this, and that's how these things are born. It's terrible.
Okay, so we've covered, I think, a couple of the issues I wanted to talk about. There are two others. Of course, I want to talk about Justice Souter, who you had great admiration for. He just passed away. But before that, I think, don't we need to talk about a case from last week and a case coming up this week?
No, we need to talk about the birthright citizenship case coming up this week.
But what about the case that we heard last week that was about charter? It was
schools. Yeah, Pete. The news flash is this: the right wing wants to destroy American public schools. They're using the Supreme Court to do it. They're going to largely succeed, and let's move on from that.
Oh dear, it's like we can't even unpack that one because of that.
It's so awful. It's a multi-pronged attack on public schools with the Supreme Court going, yes, do it, bring it to us. Yes.
Has anybody written about that you would suggest, real quick?
On Dorf on Law, a woman named Carla Corbin wrote two pieces on both cases. They're fantastic pieces. They tell you everything you want to know. But I will say, if you've listened to me on your show, you've heard it all before. We agree 100% on this. It's just they're trying to make, what they're doing is they're making public schools impossible to operate. And then they say, see how bad public schools are. We have to have public schools.
Right. They do that with all parts of government. They do it with the IRS, of course, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this week
is super important.
This week, the birthright citizenship argument is going to be heard. What do we need to know? Oh,
well, it's not actually about birthright citizenship. So lower courts struck down Trump's executive order doing away with birthright citizenship, an executive order which, even to Segall, is clearly unconstitutional, clearly wrong. No, there were a couple law professors out there defending it. They're a distinct minority, and they're just doing it to get publicity. There's no good faith arguments, but that's not the argument. What happened was a couple of the lower courts who struck this down, one of which was a Trump judge, a couple of the lower courts that struck this down said, and we're going to, it's enjoined for the whole country, which raises the issue, you might have heard about this in the news, universal injunctions, where lower court judges strike down a federal law or a decision by the president, not just to the parties before the court, you can always do that, but for the entire country. So during the Trump administration, during the Biden administration, lower court judges in Texas, a bunch of them issued universal injunctions against abortion, the abortion pill, and other type cases where one judge gets to say for the entire country. The problem is, so what the court is arguing about on later this week is not is birthright citizenship legal or not. It's should lower court judges have the authority to issue universal injunctions. And Pete, there is an answer to this. It's the only answer, but it's not an answer that's going to satisfy anyone. The answer is it depends. So
Huh.
in my federal jurisdiction class, I often phrase things like this. So the issue is X. The issue in this case is, can a lower court judge issue an injunction that binds the president and the Congress for the entire country? The answer could be never. That's one answer. No, they can't. The answer could be always. Whenever there's illegal, they could do it. Or the answer could be sometimes. When it comes to federal jurisdiction, the answer is always sometimes. It's never always or never. It's always sometimes. And the sometimes here is very, very complicated. What I'm worried about is the court is not going to recognize that. And the court is going to say either never. It's going to say never. If the court does away with universal injunctions this week, which it might do, that's going to make federal law almost impossible to enforce if the president doesn't want it enforced, because you have to file suit in every state. You have to file suit in every, if you can't get an injunction binding the entire government, then all that it's good for the people before the court. And so take the case of birthright citizenship. Right now, it's enjoined for the whole country. But if a judge can only enjoin it for the South, we can't have different rules on that for the North and the South. You can't be a citizen in the North and not be a citizen in the South. That doesn't make any sense. We can't have that kind of country. That's the issue the court is going to wrestle with. And all I can tell you is the answer the court is going to give is going to be the answer they think is in the best interests of the Republican Party long term. And I don't know what they think the answer to that question is, but it's not about law. It's everything the Roberts Court does, Pete, from Citizens United until today. Everything they do in con law is what is best for the Republican Party.
Yeah, fair enough. I think we've learned that.
Almost covered. Sheldon Whitehouse has 2,700 videos on this. If you don't believe me.
So this week, the Supreme Court could, well, they're hearing an argument. They could issue a ruling soon that says universal injunctions are no longer a thing, meaning all these lawyers and legal organizations that we're all funding and supporting that are bringing different lawsuits against any number of horrific actions, overreaches, illegal actions, they would have less.
Yes, but it goes both ways. I mean, it does go. The Supreme Court knows, I hope, maybe, that someday there'll be a Democratic president again. I mean, maybe not.
Yeah, I was thinking that too, but
maybe not. Maybe they don't think that. Maybe they think we're in for oligarchy for 25 years and they'll all be dead anyway. Who knows? Pete, I didn't phrase this very well for the non-lawyers in the group. Let me just try one more time really quickly. So let's assume your client is someone who is a citizen of this country, but this executive order illegally says is not a citizen of this country. Okay. And you go to suit and you file a lawsuit saying the government can't do this, make the government stop. Assuming it's not a class action, which are very expensive to bring and very difficult, where you bring suit on behalf of, a million people in the class or whatever. If it's not that kind of case, then the question is, when the court strikes down birthright citizenship, is it striking down just for this person or for everybody whose legal rights may be affected?
Right.
And the answer is sometimes we shouldn't have lower court judges issuing injunctions that affect the entire country. And sometimes we should, depending on the case. It's a nuanced, fact-specific. Steve Vladeck, the shadow docket guy who everybody knows and loves, Steve is very good on this issue. He just came out a couple of days ago saying there's this move towards eliminating universal injunctions. That would be a terrible idea, even for someone like me who doesn't like judges doing things, because there are times when universal injunctions are required. Have lower courts abused this? Yes. Have they abused it on both sides? Yes. Which is why we need good guidance from the Supreme Court. Except we don't have a Supreme Court. We have a Supreme Republican Party committee. And the guidance they're going to give is going to give whatever is best for the Republican Party. And I don't know what that's going to be.
Just
a little bit better.
Yeah, no, that was very, very helpful. Before I ask you about Judge Souter, there was one more.
Justice.
Geez, sorry.
Okay.
Justice Souter.
Important distinction. No, I make that point because of what I'm going to say about it.
Oh, all right. I was going to just ask you about one more issue, which I thought mattered, and it's the P. Diddy case. No, I forget what it was.
I assume you're talking about, will the Knicks be able to win Game 5? That's huge. That's just.
I'm watching, but my listeners and viewers don't listen to me for that, so I refuse to discuss it in public.
I know.
All right.
But you read my piece about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Bill Russell, so thank you for that.
That was a great piece because it talked about race in America And I thought one of the important lines on it, can't remember exactly what it was, but talking about Brown v. Board of Education, which desegregated public schools, that's in quotes, that was in 1954, but I think the line was, it wasn't until 1960 blank, 64, that the Voting Rights Act passed. So basically like 9 years, I guess, passed where the Supreme Court decided that schools should be desegregated, but they weren't desegregated. And I think the point that you make also in there is they really still are not.
Right. And the analogy I was making was, so the court issues this great decision that's all about getting rid of segregated schools, but 9 years later, the South is 98% segregated. 98% segregated. Bill Russell changed the game of basketball, won 11 championships in 13 years, was just the best team sports player in American history by the standards of his day, and yet they put people in Boston put poop in his bed. On the surface, it looked like this great black superstar was being treated with the respect and dignity.
He broke into his apartment, wrote horrible things on the walls, and dropped a bag of shit in his bed. Just
after he won 4 championships for them.
After he won 4 championships for him, the people of Boston broke into his house and vandalized it and left. Yeah.
So on the surface, we had this black hero. Behind the surface, we had feces in his bed left by white bigots. On the surface, we had a great Supreme Court decision about the segregated schools. But at the end of the day, the Supreme Court did nothing. It wasn't until Congress came in and tied federal money to getting rid of official segregation. So anyway, that's thank you. I thank you for letting me talk about that.
No, it's a great, and I think everybody should read that piece at Dorf on Law that Eric wrote. And if you're watching or listening and you're not following him on Blue Sky, he's very active there. And sometimes he tweets or posts about sports. And I usually zone out. So Justice Souter is someone that you admired a great deal, and you wrote a piece about him as well, I believe. And so what do you want to say about his legacy and why it matters and why it should matter?
So a few things. One personal story. Justice Souter was nominated in the late 89, I think it was, during the first Bush administration. I was working for the Bush administration as a closet progressive liberal, not so much in the closet. And when his name was nominated, a lot of Democrats were really sad, and they're going to overturn Roe versus Wade, and it's all going to be terrible. And I said to people, no, don't worry about it. He's not going to do any of those things. He lives with his mother, which he did at the time. He was clearly someone who didn't do tradition for tradition's sake. But this is why I love Justice Souter. He hated being on the Supreme Court. And that's why he retired early. After only 19 years, he was young. His health was good. He retired because he famously hated Washington, and he pretty famously hated the job. He hated the job, Pete, because he knew he wasn't a judge. He wanted to be a judge. And he knew being a Supreme Court justice was not being a judge. How do I know this about him? Because the week after he retired, give or take, he gave a speech at Harvard commencement where he said, people don't understand what we do at the Supreme Court. We don't read text and apply it to facts. We balance values. We have one value, and then we balance, white people want to be treated equally, but we have to make up for the sins of the past. Women, we need to treat women as real full citizens, but there are fetuses that are a lot, everything it is about balancing. And he hated that because he didn't think that was a judge's work. So one of the things I loved about Justice Souter was he was modest, he was humble, and he knew that he was sideways to the job that he was given. He thought he was going to be a real judge, but he ended up being this kind of super constitutional judge that he knew wasn't what we usually think of as judges. Judge Posner was often asked, were you mad you weren't on the Supreme Court? Because he was always on top of the list back in the 80s. And he said, no, because I want to be on a real court. So Souter is the only justice of our lifetime that recognized what the Supreme Court is, which is a political institution balancing values. And then he was brave enough to say it out loud, which I really like. On his jurisprudence, Pete, people characterized him as a liberal, but he was mostly moderate. And he was a liberal, he was center left. He's an example of someone, though, who really tried, I think, to figure out what the Constitution means before he decided how he would vote. And that's not how it works with 99% of Supreme Court justices. So I think, and one last thing, I know many of his clerks, and all clerks love their justices, but the extent to which his clerks loved him is even over the top, because I think he was deep down something that we no longer value. He was like my judges I worked for in the early 80s, my Republican judges who were before FedSoc. They had a sense of justice and empathy. And Souter had a sense of justice and empathy. Alito and Thomas couldn't find empathy if it hit them in the face.
Would you say there is a case that he is most known for? Maybe Bush v. Gore, or
no, because he didn't get to write, Pete, in his time period. The only majority opinions that were written in big con law cases were by O'Connor, Kennedy, or the Chief Justice, because you had to get O'Connor or Kennedy to get 5 votes. So
you're only known. You're talking a little above my head. I was saying what key votes, but you're saying unless you wrote the decision,
yes,
the decision, you're not. It's not part of your legacy. I was just thinking about where he came down on cases like Planned Parenthood versus Casey, or
so he believed in what Justice Harlan believed. There's a Justice Harlan of the 60s and 70s who was very moderate and universally thought
Justice Harlan Thomas Kroll.
That's the one, yeah. That's good. He believed that judges could reason to find fundamental rights. Now, I don't agree with him about that, by the way. But at least he said he didn't pretend. Alito and Thomas pretend not to do that, and then they do it in the cases they like. Justice Souter recognized what they were doing. We're making it up, folks. There's no answer to balancing values. There's no answer for that. It's one person's opinion versus another person's opinion. As a judge, my job is to do all of that with reference to text and history. But he got this illusion, Pete, because he was the only one in the court who cared about text and history. And that includes liberals and conservatives. He wanted to be a real judge. And you can't be a real judge in the Supreme Court. You just can't, as he found out, which is why he didn't get to write anything. Because being a real judge, he wasn't able to do the system in a way. He wrote a very famous dissent in an 11th Amendment case that I think is great, but it's a little wonky for this. But saying he didn't write many major con law opinions, Pete, the same is true for most of the Justice Thomas until 2018, never wrote a big con law decision. Justice Ginsburg didn't write big con law decisions because only Kennedy and O'Connor got to do that. It was one of the big faults of our system. O'Connor and Kennedy wrote everything for 20 years. Sorry, end of that. Justice Souter was a good man. And first and foremost, judges need to be good. That's my view.
You have also said certain justices are bad people.
Well, Justice Harlan Thomas Crowe, speaking of taking give, maybe we should go full circle here. So Justice Harlan Thomas Crowe allowed a billionaire to pay for his wife's salary, his kids' private school tuition, and his mother's mortgage, which is basically funding a lifestyle. That's all documented. He has never denied any of those 3 things, and yet he sits as a justice on the Supreme Court. It's unfucking believable if you really think about it.
You think that's bad?
Say again?
You think that's bad?
I think it's bad when a billionaire supports your wife, your mother, and your child. Yes. I think that a billionaire who has interest before the court. Yes, I think that's very, very bad. By the way, we are where Leonard Leo wants us to be right now. He's been quiet. He's dispersing his money privately and secretly because he doesn't want to embarrass FedSoc, because most FedSoc lawyers don't want this, what Trump is doing. But Leonard Leo does. And history will give him a lot of the blame when it's all said and done.
A lot of the blame.
Yep. He funded this. This has all been funded by Leo.
Just real quick, in case people, probably a lot of people watching know who Leonard Leo is, but he's from the Federal Society. He got billions of dollars in donations from.
But more importantly, it's something he did much more important than any of that. He had the idea of giving Trump a list of nominees to the Supreme Court.
He chose.
It won Trump the election. Trump does not win in 2016 without the list. Almost every election expert I talked to says that. 20% of the people left the voting booth saying, I voted for Donald Trump because of the Supreme Court. 20% of those who voted for him.
We could talk a lot more about his influence, but more importantly, where does Leonard Leo want us to be and how are we there?
He wants us to be in a white nationalist Christian society.
White nationalist Christian society, and you think we are there?
We're not there yet, but we're certainly getting there. We're very, very close.
Trying to make it great again.
Steve Miller is already there, and he's the deputy chief of staff, but to me, it looks like he's running things.
Somebody said in the chat, a guy I know who's watching live, Ron, said,
"Hi, Ron.
Stephen Miller was a bitter nerd who got rejected by Latinas in high school. He's the OG incel." And I know there's a lot published about his whole life because he was outspoken in high school and at Duke, and like his whole life, he drew a lot of attention publicly. And I wonder how. I can't cast aspersions. I hate the man, but God, sometimes it is interesting to try to psychoanalyze why someone might be a certain way.
He's so angry, Pete. Every word he utters. Actually, that's the way I've noticed. Thank you for pulling this out of me. That's the common denominator. They're all so angry. Pam Biondi is like, the president wants never, and the press secretary.
But don't you think a lot of it is
offended by this?
It's very performative, though.
It's completely no. Actually, I think they believe it. I think they believe it, but you gotta, when the mics and the cameras turn on, they really do. I even saw, it's funny, this guy, I obviously covered politics for a long time, so I've watched, for example, most of the senators who've been there for a while. Senator John Barroso of Wyoming, who gets the same, his vote counts as much as the senators from California, and there's 600,000 people there. You could probably have a few comments about that. And he now he used to be soft-spoken, and now he sounds like all the rest of these MAGA. He's yelling on Meet the Press. I mean, it is almost like, what's that movie?
He was asked 3 times. I'm sorry, just to be clear, the question that she asked him, the reporter Kirsten Welker, would you, as a U.S. senator, vote to suspend habeas corpus? He would not answer the question. He said over and over loudly, Donald Trump will follow the law. President Trump will follow the law.
They all say things with such intensity and such dogmatism, and what they're saying is demonstrably and provably incorrect, that I feel like I'm in 1984 every day. I feel like I see now what happens in other countries. I see how people come to power with just obvious lies spoken with the greatest sincerity. And by the way, the Attorney General, we've had different people be press secretary and chief of staff and all that stuff with different styles. But I have never seen it. Even Jeff Sessions, who is the lowest of the low. This Attorney General, Pete, I mean, she is. You know what I think is happening? This is just Segall, and I'm sure I'm wrong. I think DeSantis is playing a much larger role behind the scenes than people think. I think a lot of this sounds like DeSantis. She comes from DeSantis. She's not. I think DeSantis is actually very much looming here. In
terms of what tone?
I don't know, but the difference between this administration and the first Trump administration.
Oh, is it less DeSantis himself and more Florida and what they've been able to do there?
Maybe, but no, it's this. DeSantis really started the whole game of saying things so intently that were so obviously false and acting that part kind of. And I don't know. I have a feeling that he's been very quiet.
Well, how about this? Trump was the first one to really do that every day and get away with it to a certain extent. And so others eventually started to copy him, including DeSantis and now Pam Biondi and almost everybody outside of the Treasury Secretary, who sounds like this and sounds like sometimes he gets angry and he says, don't make me pull out the escalation letter I have in my pocket against China. I'll do it.
Every time I watch a congressional hearing, I get these snippets on TikTok and then I go watch it myself. These people are stretching the boundaries of what it means to be a human being in ways that I have just. Yeah. If I pay too much attention to it, that's why I'm writing about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Bill Russell, because I do want to make one serious point, Pete. The premise of all of our conversations for 15 years now, however long it's been, has been, even at my most cynical, some idea that law matters, even to Thomas, even to Alito, some idea that the Constitution and what rule. And I got to say, I'm not naive. I was there. I was there for Iran-Contra. I was working for Bush. I was there for big cases. Of course, the Constitution gets relegated to second-class citizenship when policy needs to be done. But I have never seen it so distorted, where things that everybody believed, birthright citizenship, everyone believes in that.
Well, in the legal world, I mean, people don't like that idea.
What I mean is, it was never a thing that was ever going to get to a court, because It was just off the wall nonsense and crazy. Not only is it getting to courts, but they're indignant. Like, they're indignant that they're right.
Yeah.
But, it wouldn't be that different than saying Brown versus Board of Education stands for the proposition that separate but equal is constitutional. Separate but equal works. Separate but equal is the law of the land. Well, no, it's not. Just go read it. That's what this is, Pete. It's no different from that.
Yeah. They're just interpreting it in a way.
Crazy.
If you say something with a certain tone, I've gotten away with this personally, with a certain confidence and tone, and it's just a short bite or something, you can win a lot of.
I'll give you an example. Of course, the Boston Celtics are great, but they fucking cheat. They cheat all the time. They have a history of cheating. I can show you 1,000 examples of the Boston Celtics cheating. God damn it, and I'm right.
Again, I object on grounds of subjectiveness.
That's how they talk. It's just
depends on how you define cheating. You should have said the Patriots. They're more well known.
Pam Biondi.
Isn't it Blondie?
I don't care.
Biondi is the word for blonde in Italian. So I want to.
The level of her dogmatism compared to how wrong she is historical. It's historical.
the disparity between her tone and the accuracy of what she's saying is it's a
Alito-like. It's Alito. It's like Justice Souter. Yes. All right. Yes.
All good stuff. All good to have your interpretation, your thoughts, your expertise on all of it. Thank you for joining me live on YouTube and Facebook. And thanks everybody who watched. And I'll post this on the podcast for tomorrow. And Eric, you're the greatest.
Thank you, my friend. Always enjoy it. Thank you.
All right.